Hello, everyone. This is our third lecture in Psych 414, Ethics. I want to talk about ethical principles. And let me see whether I can start the slideshow here so you can have all the notes with you. Yes, so this lecture takes care of two topics: ethical principles and then steps in ethical decision making. I may make it into two videos or two recordings. So we will start with ethical principles, and these are the moral principles that undergird ethics. They are the general philosophy about ethics. You know, the ethics that we are going to be learning in this course, on what are they grounded? On what are they based? So they are aspirational. And when we say aspirational ethics, we mean they describe the highest standards of thinking and conduct professional counselors seek. It requires that counselors do more than simply the letter of the code, as in it's not just following blindly, but it helps us understand the spirit behind the ethical codes or the ethical standards that we shall be looking at. So it tells us the principles, the philosophy on which the code rests. It gives us the ideal. So from this moment, it would be very good if you would realize that there's a difference between principles and standards. Principles are the general philosophical underpinnings of the standards. We will be looking at the standards. In their course outline, they include things like informed consent, which should be our next lecture. Talks about competence, confidentiality, your relationship with the client, and all that. Those are standards. So what are these aspirational moral principles? The first principle is beneficence and non-maleficence. This talks about benefit. You can say the word beneficence comes from the word benefit. So it talks about the requirement for psychologists to strive to benefit those with whom they work and take care not to do any harm. So what does this look like? What is it made up of? One is, as psychologists, we seek to safeguard the welfare and rights of our clients and others we interact with. Really, this means that constantly in our minds, we are thinking, how do I safeguard the welfare of my client? How am I being careful not to breach the rights of the client? Some of the rights we will see as we look at the standards. Remember, these are just general principles. So when conflicts occur among psychologists' obligations or concerns, when there's a conflict in whichever area you are working, actually, I need to say at this point that these principles undergird with whatever you do as a psychologist. As long as you're a psychologist and you're either doing research or you're seeing clients in therapy or you're teaching, these principles apply to you. So you're thinking that when there's a conflict, the second bullet there, if there's a conflict, you will resolve it in a way that avoids harm or minimizes harm. A good example would be, say, for example, the institution you work for is giving you directions or instructions in a way that will harm those whom you serve. You are required to resolve that conflict with minimum harm to those whom you serve. So, for example, in this era of online teaching, there seems to be, or online learning or e-learning, there seems to be some sort of misunderstanding that when you're doing e-learning, as a teacher, you post the materials on the e-learning platform and then come to class and teach those materials. There's that misunderstanding. The real way of doing online learning is the lecturer posts the materials, you interact with them, and then once in a while, not every week, but once in a while, meet together as teacher and students and discuss that material. So there seems to be a misunderstanding that lectures must be done for 2 hours, which totally defeats the purpose of the e-learning platform. So if, for example, my boss is saying, post the e-learning materials, don't meet the students, then the students are feeling we need to meet the teacher to clarify. So how will I resolve the conflict between wrong instructions from my boss and the people I serve, which is you, the students? So I have to resolve that in the best possible way without harming you. And I'd like to hear in class how you think that dilemma should be resolved. Because psychologists, scientific and professional judgments and actions may affect the lives of others, like that example I've just given you, they have to be alert. We have to be alert and guard against any sort of benefit to ourselves, be it financial, personal, social, organizational, or political factors, whichever way it may benefit me as a psychologist. I really need to guard against that and not to misuse my influence. So, for example, or rather, most times clients come to you because they have a problem. And for that reason, they're coming to seek help. They look at you as, they know it, the be all, no all be all, something like that. And so you have a certain level of influence on clients. We call it the power differential. There's a power play between you and the client, and you must exercise professional judgment and take actions that do not ride on that influence. Clients are very happy to do things for you if you ask them because they're in a position of power. The same thing with students. Some of you will go on to become lecturers and you will experience that students look at you as a person of authority. I mean, I've been a student for so many years, and that's how I have, even after finishing school, I still almost revere my teachers. So as a teacher, I cannot afford to take advantage of that power to myself, to my advantage. I must exercise it as a psychologist to the benefit of my students always. So therefore, psychologists strive to be aware of the possible effect of their own physical and mental health on their ability to help those they work with. So that means that be aware of not just the power you have, but, and these 2 points are connected in a way I'm going to explain. So you have to be aware of your own physical and mental health. So for example, if you are in distress, say for example, you are grieving the loss of a girlfriend or of a boyfriend, of a bee, you are grieving, and your client who is coming to see you is grieving about the loss of their bee as well. So you need to be very aware of your mental state so that you don't harm your client. See, you have this authority. That's why the client is coming to you. There's a power differential, and you can choose to say, I am the one who is the counselor here. It doesn't matter what I'm feeling. I will see this client. After all, I need to earn my money, financial gain. So all the time, you must think, if I see a client when I'm in this mental state or I'm physically sick, am I doing them good or am I doing them harm? I remember a time when one of my supervisors and I were to examine a student. In PhD level, there are some oral exams that students do. And my boss and I had received some news. We had discussed it just before the student came in. And we were so totally shattered. We were so psychologically destabilized. And we asked each other, are we going to be fair to this student? If the student comes in and presents when we are in this state, is it really going to be fair for the student? And when the student came in, we decided we will explain to her our mental state is not good. Please let us reschedule your presentation. And the student was able to understand. So we could have gone on with it because we were senior to her, but we realized it would harm her. So I hope the point is made, and we can go to principle B. That's a mistake. It should be principle B, which is fidelity and responsibility. And this means that psychologists establish relationships of trust. Fidelity here is talking about trust. So whether you're teaching, whether you're researching, whether you're in therapy with a client, the issue of trust is very sorry, very important. I was just reading the next big fat word. So as psychologists, we must be aware of our professional and scientific responsibilities to society and to the people we serve. This is to say, we actually do have a responsibility. The moment you qualify as a psychologist, there is a responsibility that sits on your shoulders that you must carry. And part of this responsibility is to manage any conflict of interest. One of the responsibilities is to be very aware of this client. What should be my relationship with them? One of the things we are going to see is, for example, can your client be your milk or vegetable supplier? Yeah. So you have to be aware of your professional role. And if there is any conflict of interest, manage it to the best interests of the client. So psychologists consult, refer to, or cooperate with other psychologists. This is part of maintaining trust and your responsibility. You do not do this thing alone. I do not practice alone. I do not teach without the input of my fellow colleagues, my fellow lecturers. We are always talking and saying, how are you teaching this? Do you have a video that can show this? We are always in consultation. Similar to when you're in practice, you can't afford to practice alone. What does this have to do with trust? When you consult, refer, or cooperate with others, you are working to serve the best interests of your client. Your client needs to trust that you are working behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, if there's such an expression, for their good. So you're establishing a practice or a level of professional conduct that is trustworthy. So you are responsible. You are responsible to carry out your duties without exploiting or harming the client. Therefore, you become trustworthy. We have a lot of quacks in this country, and it all stems from they are not aware of these ethics we are talking about, or if they are aware, they flout them. So I think we saw that in the lecture on limitations of ethics. Some people know them, but they don't practice them. So that is also why we are concerned about the ethical compliance of our colleagues. You are not required to be an investigator looking out for, or a general inspector looking out for the who is violating ethics. But if it comes to your knowledge, you need to be concerned. And at some point we will see, what do you do about when your colleagues violate ethics? So part of your ethical philosophical outlook is, are all clients being treated ethically? If it comes to your knowledge, then there's something you need to do about it. Another aspect of being trustworthy, another responsibility that we carry, is we strive to contribute a portion of our time for little or no compensation or personal advantage. We call this pro bono. Ethically, you must be somehow doing some pro bono work. And in my practice, I have a policy. For example, I'm not saying I'm the world's best pro bono person. I'm just saying that in my practice, 5% of my clients either pay a reduced fee or don't pay at all. I have a certain criteria for choosing those, and that is my contribution, my pro bono contribution. Sometimes when you're a teacher or a facilitator of learning, you find yourself spending so much time that the employer cannot compensate you for. So sometimes you find yourself going really out of your way to do things to improve your teaching or your supervising of students. That's also pro bono. You don't go and tell your employer, do you know I'm only employed to teach 3 hours and I've spent 9 hours on this class? That is part of saying, this is what I'm giving back. And then we have principle C, which is integrity, which I think is self-explanatory. But the APA code says that we psychologists seek to promote accuracy, honesty, and truthfulness in the science, which is referring to research, teaching, and practice of psychology. We should be the world's most honest people. Accuracy in what you say, in what you do. As you research, for example, you are telling your participants exactly what you're doing. Have to be truthful. The exception to this may surprise you, but we are coming to it soon. So in everything we do not steal or cheat or engage in fraud, subterfuge, or intentional misrepresentation of fact. This is an excellent definition of integrity. So it's not just telling the truth, but it's not also telling half-truths, white lies, and all types of lying. It is being utmostly truthful. And I've had students asking me, is it really possible to be 100% truthful? And my response is always that honesty is the best policy. So better just, maybe it will cause pain, maybe discomfort, but it is the best way. So part of integrity is to keep promises, avoid unwise or unclear commitments. I can see you on Saturdays. And then you know that you don't wake up early on Saturday and you're promising somebody a session on Saturday at 8. So they wait for you, they wait for you, they wait for you, they give up. And I've seen fellow colleagues who keep clients waiting 1 hour, 2 hours. It's totally lack of integrity. But this might surprise you. There are situations in which deception may be ethically justifiable. This is rare, and this is with a lot of consultation and advice. Times when you may use deception, you must be very clear in your mind that you are maximizing a certain benefit and you are minimizing harm. This deception is for this purpose, to maximize benefits and minimize harm. So you don't just wake up and decide, for example, you're going to deceive your research participants. It is you have to really think it through, maybe seek consultation and supervision so that you do it to the best interest of the client, and as soon as is practically possible, correct any resulting mistrust or harmful effects that arise from the use of deception. So I'd like you to think about situations where you would find yourself needing to deceive a client. Yeah, how we need situations. I've talked about disclosing to a child their parent is dying in a question mark. One of the situations I've seen deception working is when people are being taken to rehab. Somebody should remind me in class to bring up that. So, but also think about it. When would you find it ethically appropriate to use deception? The fourth principle is justice. And this talks about fairness. Psychologists recognize that fairness and justice entitle all persons to access to and benefit from the contributions of psychology and to equal quality in the processes, procedures, and services being conducted by psychologists. So we treat everybody the same. We do not withhold the knowledge that we have if it's going to help somebody. We are saying everybody has the right to access psychological services. And so we exercise reasonable judgment and take precautions to ensure that our potential biases, the boundaries of our competence, and the limitations of our expertise do not lead to or condone unjust practices. So basically, this one is saying, be aware in your mind. Are you being fair and just to all the people you are serving? This one, I remember it a lot in the teaching aspect of my career, because am I favoring some students? Am I showing partiality to some? And I remember that all students are equal. The one who is the most brilliant, most diligent, most hardworking, the lazy one, the one who doesn't want to come to class. I mean, I've been a student, so I know, and I've played all these roles. There are times I just didn't want to go to class. There are times an assignment is late, I don't feel like doing it. So as a psychologist, and I'm talking not just as a lecturer, I'm talking as a psychologist, I do not have the luxury to do what is the word? To be partial to some students and not others. I will serve all equally. I will be fair to all equally. So again, this also speaks to me in practice. I have clients who come from very leafy suburbs, and I have clients who come from the Mark and Mire, and I treat them all the same. So again, if somebody could remind me in class, I have an example of having served a very senior government official, and that story, I mean, the story of my experience with that person serves to remind me all the time that all human beings are equal and they must be treated equally. So in my practice, even if the president walks in, I am not going to change 1 second of how I treat my clients. I will treat him like every other client because everybody is equal. So I cannot find myself condoning the practice of now the president has come, we have to put a red carpet, he will be treated exactly the same way as I will treat anybody from anywhere. So that's justice. And the last one is respect for people's rights and dignity. You realize that all these principles, all this philosophy, they're intertwined. You know, you can't have one and not have the other. And if you've listened to the other four, you can hear it's all about respecting people's rights and dignity. So we are required to respect the dignity and worth of all people and the right of individuals to privacy, confidentiality, and self-determination, which are some of the things we will be looking at as standards. And so we are not required just to treat everybody equally, but also to protect the rights and welfare of people who have vulnerabilities. So it's not just a reactive requirement, we are also required to be proactive. Go out of your way to understand your clients, your students, your participants in research. What might their vulnerabilities be? And how can you address them so that you don't harm them? You do it to minimize harm and maximize benefits. And also you do it out of a situation of trust. You know, you are a trustworthy person, so you are respecting their dignity. For example, in our school, in this school, there's been a lot of conversation about how are students feeling sitting through 3-hour Zooms. You know, are we doing the right thing? If a student has 3 classes, for example, in one day, how do they sit through 9 hours of Zoom? You know, or sit, you know, they've read and then they come. So we've been having a lot of discussions on, you know, it is oppressive to students to keep them in class for so long. And I wish I could hear from you people because I've had, again, the misunderstanding of online teaching or online learning. I've had people saying, we've paid for 3 hours. Why are we being taught for 1 hour? Forgetting that you've read materials for more than 1 hour. You probably interacted in a discussion, and then you have this short Zoom class. So out of consideration, in the evening classes where we have people who are working, they are also saying, we sit through work in Zoom meetings. You can't come and teach us for 3 hours again in Zoom in the evening. Sorry. So in our school, because in our department, because we are psychologists, we are thinking of this is a time of vulnerability for our students, also for lecturers who spend hours and hours reading, putting materials on, you know, coming to class. Both the students and the teachers are working extra hard. So we have to find ways of making it easier or making it less painful. This is part of respecting you as students, realizing you're human beings, you're adults, you have the right to make your choices, and we want to make it as comfortable as possible for you so that learning can happen. So that's one of the examples we can give in this. And you can think of many other examples, but those are the 5 fundamental ethical principles. And when we are doing the standards, if you could remember them and think about in this standard, which principle is operating, and you will find most of the time, most of the standards we'll be looking at, all the 5 principles apply. So we will move on to, I'm sorry, I have omitted this and it's very important. Let me just say 1 or 2 things. Psychologists are aware of and respect cultural, individual, and role differences. So including those based on age, gender identity, race, ethnicity, culture, national origin, all these things that in the previous class we talked about, not discriminating. So this came under justice. I think the slide just interchanged. So part of justice is respecting people's individuality, their culture, so that when people come for therapy, for example, this is where we say, for example, if a Muslim comes for therapy, you don't start evangelizing them. That's not the place to evangelize them, because that shows a disrespect for their religion, for example. So when you're working with individuals, or even in research, you're working with communities, it's very important to respect just their uniqueness, the uniqueness of the person you're dealing with, and consider that you are not discriminating on these grounds. So you have to be very aware of your biases. If, for example, you believe because you were colonized by the British, all British people are bad, if you are seeing a British client, then you have to be aware that you have that bias. If you feel that bias is going to mess up the client, then you refer the client. You don't see the client. And it's the same thing, therapists struggle with sexual orientation, especially Christian therapists. If you feel you're not going to be able to tolerate a gay person in your therapy room, please don't keep them there and keep condemning them. Refer them, and refer them without making them feel there's something wrong with them. Just explain that their lifestyle and your values are clashing, and it's not going to be fair to have therapy. So that's part of justice. I'm sorry the slides interchanged somehow and I didn't notice in good time. So this slide belongs to the principle of justice. And that brings us to the end of ethical principles. And as I said again, please distinguish them from the standards that we are going to be looking at. The standards are the philosophy on which, the principles are the philosophy on which the standards are based. Thank you.